Guys, welcome. Thank you for coming once again. My name is Joe Darlington. I do a little podcast called Being James Bond. I also am the author of this book, Being James Bond Volume 1, which has a lot of chapters about things James Bond does. One of them is drinks and mixology. It's really the soup to nuts of everything having to do with booze and alcohol, everything I think that James Bond would know. Coincidentally, I also taught a bartending class for a couple of years, which was a lot of fun. So this was sort of a natural. A few years ago, a friend of mine, David Zaritsky, who you might know, does a website called The Bond Experience, was throwing a little Bond shindig, and he asked me to put something together. And I said, well, it's a party, so I might as well do something alcohol-related. But I didn't want to redo the whole kind of bartending 101, so I came up with this, which is called the Cocktails of James Bond. This is basically going to be... it's going to be cocktails that you've seen James Bond imbibe in many of the films, but it is also, there's a lot of things that sort of fall in between, things that James Bond has said that people would sort of say, what does that mean? What is he talking about there? You know, it'll fill in the blanks to a lot of mystery about a lot of the alcohol-related James Bond things. So I like to start this off with a quote which is very familiar. A dry martini, he said, one in a champagne goblet. Oui, monsieur, just a moment. 3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka, half a measure of Quina Lillet. Shake it very well until it's ice cold, and then add a large slice of lemon peel. We will come full circle once more, and of course this is from Ian Fleming in Casino Royale. This will be a 6-part discussion. I normally don't do this. The syllabus is a little too fancy for me, but I find that when I get halfway through, people are going to think I'm going to do like all 24 films, and I'm really not. So just to give you a heads up, we're going to talk about the Vodka Martini, which of course showed up in Dr. No. We'll do the Mint Julep, which showed up in Goldfinger. We will discuss the Collins, which of course Bond has in Thunderball. We will try a Sazerac, which James Bond orders in Live and Let Die, doesn't actually get it. We will discuss the Mojito, which comes back in Die Another Day. And then, of course, the Vesper, which is in Casino Royale. So before we get into part 1, I'd like to start off with another of my favorite quotes, and I promise this part will go fast. This is a cafe called Fouquet's in Paris. James Bond had his first drink of the evening at Fouquet's. It was not a solid drink. One cannot enjoy solid drinks in French cafes. Out of doors, on a pavement in the sun, is no place for vodka or whiskey or gin. No, in cafes, you have to drink the least offensive of the musical comedy drinks that go with them. And Bond always had the same thing, an Americano. Bitter Campari, Cinzano, a large slice of lemon peel, and soda. And for the soda, he always specified Perrier, for in his opinion, expensive soda water was the cheapest way to improve a poor drink. If he wanted a solid drink, he had it at Harry's bar, both because of the solidity of the drinks and because, on his first ignorant visit to Paris at the age of 16, he had done what Harry's advertisement in the Continental Daily Mail had told him to do, and he said to the taxi driver, 5 Rue de New, and that had started one of the most memorable evenings of his life, culminating in the loss almost simultaneous of his virginity and his note case. This, of course, is Ian Fleming in For Your Eyes Only. Now, the reason why I harp on this is because Fleming was obviously a drinker. He drank with a lot of variety, which kind of sort of goes away in some of the films later, especially because James Bond sort of settles into vodka martinis, of course, and champagne. But in the novels, there was a wide variety of different cocktails. Now, of course, the first film would be from the novel Dr. No. And in that novel, Bond said, I would like a medium vodka dry martini. That is not a typo, that is how it was written in the book. A medium vodka dry martini with a slice of lemon peel. Shaken and not stirred, please. I would prefer Russian or Polish vodka. Dr. No gave his thin smile an extra crease. I see you are also a man who knows what he wants. And of course, that is from Ian Fleming and Dr. No. And of course, the first James Bond film was Dr. No. And in that film,
medium dry martini, lemon peel, shaken, not stirred.
Vodka?
Of course.
And of course, with that, cocktail history and cinema history was made. So with that, we can discuss the martini. Question: how does James Bond always order his martini? Anything else?
On the rocks.
No. In general, he'll say, and again, it kind of varies from film to film, he'll say a medium dry vodka martini, shaken, not stirred. What I like about that, and when I was teaching bartending classes, I used to always throw that out as my example. I'd say, James Bond orders a medium dry vodka martini, shaken, not stirred. Based on those clarifications, what does that tell you that a martini would be? Okay. What's that? Well, he specifies a vodka martini. Most martinis are actually gin. The traditional martini is gin. So basically he's specifying. And when he says shaken, not stirred, that also specifies that most martinis were stirred as opposed to shaken. So the basic martini would be made of gin and it's stirred. Which brings me to my first question. Since gin was such the rage, why was James Bond such a vodka enthusiast? Well, in Fleming's time, most vodkas were made from potatoes. It was not known as a high-quality liquor. In the 50s and 60s, the better vodkas were made from grain, and as the quote from Dr. No implies, they were found primarily in areas of Eastern Europe, like Poland and Russia, which I think explains why our Cold War hero is so associated with vodka. Today, almost all vodkas are made from a fermented mash of grain and distilled at a very high proof of 190 or higher, and usually distilled even further to neutralize its flavor. It also sort of throws out the question, why is vodka so popular since it's a neutral flavor? It is something that is intended to not have flavor, yet it's huge. People can go back and forth on that, but it also, because it's neutral, it also lends itself to a variety of different cocktails. Vodka and cranberry, vodka and Coke, vodka and whatever, vodka tonic. And now vodka is one of the most popular drinks in the world. So you could debate the merits of vodka, but again, it is a Cold War find in James Bond's time, and I believe that's why it is so popular. So let's talk about what is a martini. The funny thing about a martini is that on one hand, it is a very complicated cocktail because everyone wants their martini a specific way. But when you actually get down to it, it is an incredibly simple cocktail. In fact, I used to, when I would teach, I would grab a bottle of vodka or gin, grab a bottle of vermouth, and I would say, here is your steak, here is your seasoning. That is basically what a martini is. So what are the 5 things that you need to know to either prepare or to order a martini? Again, what it started out as a very simple cocktail has gotten very complicated because each person's palate is different. So there are 5 basic components of a martini. The first, and some of them are obvious, but again, you need to know specifically. A, is it gin or vodka? Somebody walks into my bar, a young kid walks into my bar and he says, I'd like a martini, please. I know that this kid has never had a martini in his life and he's curious to know what all the hubbub is all about. Somebody who drinks a martini will say, I want a medium dry Boodles martini straight up with olives. You also want to know what brand. There are certain cocktails where somebody walks in and orders a rum and Coke. Your bartender will probably reach down his speed rack, grab whatever the cheap stuff is, and make a rum and Coke. If you're drinking a martini, you are drinking a lot of alcohol. You want the good stuff. You don't want the crummy stuff that's sitting in the shelf. So you should know, or at least let them guide you towards what brand you should be drinking or you want to try. How dry? Who knows what dryness means? The amount of vermouth. If it's very dry, what does that mean?
You're wetting the bottle over it.
There you go. If they don't specify medium dry, you use a splash of vermouth, depending if it's gin or vodka. If it's the drier they want it, the less vermouth. And again, it's interesting the difference between gin and vodka martinis will also affect how much vermouth you should use. People who ask for vodka martinis usually don't want much vermouth. Vermouth wasn't really designed to go with vodka. It goes perfectly with gin. There's an aromatic, botanical quality of gin that really goes with vermouth. For vodka, not so much. So usually if somebody says medium dry, if I hear gin, I will put a hearty splash of vermouth in. If I hear medium dry in a vodka, I'll put a couple drops. Now, of course, we get to the next question, which is one of my favorites, shaken or stirred. I have a quote here from, anybody remember the West Wing, the show West Wing? There's a scene here that will lead into a discussion about James Bond and about martinis.
You're better off with the standard deduction.
Okay.
I'm hitting send now. If you're lying about any of this, you're going to the joint.
Yeah.
It's going to tell us what your refund is, but I've done a quick calculation, and it'll be $700.
That's what I got, too.
You've spent it already, haven't you?
I'm getting a scanned DVD player with MP3 playback. Free shipping and tax is $499, which will leave enough left over to buy a great DVD I found on eBay.
Yeoman of the Guard?
Oh, how well you know me, Mr. President. On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Can I tell you what's messed up about James Bond?
Nothing.
Shaken, not stirred, will get you cold water with a dash of gin and dry vermouth. The reason you stir it with a special spoon is so not to chip the ice. James is ordering a weak martini and being snooty about it.
When this aired, I had friends send this to me, and immediately I was like, then I went, is he right? So I had to kind of pause for a second. I love in this clip, by the way, like I love how fast when the guy says, you know what's messed up about James Bond? He goes, nothing. Like that. Okay, shaken or stirred. What's the problem with shaking a martini? Here we go. If you are doing a gin martini, I personally recommend that you stir it. He's correct that if you overshake it, you will, again, you are breaking the ice, you are liquefying, you're adding water to your cocktail. If you're having a gin martini, this is not what you want. Vodka martinis are different. Vodka is not palatable warm. If you drink warm vodka, it is like lighter fluid. That's why I believe that James Bond will always shake it until it is ice cold. It's a personal preference, but again, vodka just doesn't work unless it's ice cold. When you make a martini, you shake a vodka martini, you shake it until there is frost on the tin of that shaker. That's when you know you're finished. Gin, again, you can get away with it. There's an old expression about not bruising the gin. That's why you don't shake a gin martini. I don't know what that means necessarily, but I go with it. I say, you know what? I'll stir my gin martinis and I will shake my vodka martinis.
I have a question. What's a dirty martini?
I'll get to it.
Oh, okay.
Lastly, just think of that old Dickens film, Dickens book, excuse me, Oliver Twist. Which garnish? Is it an olive or a twist? Typically, gin martinis go well with olives. Lemon twists go well with vodka martinis. But again, it's all personal preference. So, funny little side note, when I usually do this lecture, I usually have booze in front of me, and I'm usually mixing and stirring and making drinks as I'm doing this. Because of where we are, because there are limitations to what we can do here, I'm simply going to give you the martini recipe. By the way, if you're interested, if you want to take a screenshot of this, I do not mind that, if anybody wants to take a shot with their camera or whatever. But very quickly, I'll go through it. A martini, take your cocktail glass, fill it with ice to chill it and set it aside. Take your cocktail shaker or pint glass and fill it about 3/4 with ice. This is where you're going to mix your actual martini. Now, there's a little trick I like to tell you. Add your vodka. You can measure out 3 ounces of vodka, or you can simply fill the glass enough to fill your cocktail glass, which is usually around the top of the ice. Now, what I'm trying to suggest here is that, let's say you go home on Monday and you decide you want a home bar and you're going to buy some martini glasses. The typical martini glasses you get today, some of them are huge. They're like 5-ounce glasses. Back in the day, they were much smaller, 3 ounces. So what you can do, a little trick, fill your martini glass to about, 1/4 inch from the top with water. Take that, take a shaker filled with ice, pour this water into here, and you see how high it goes, okay? There's your little cheat sheet. So now, from now on, when you go to make a martini, you can fill it to that level, you'll shake it, you'll strain it into the glass, it'll be perfect every time, and people will wonder, how did you get that right? Okay, add your vermouth. Again, it depends on your personal preference, how dry, less dry, whatever. Place the top of your shaker onto your, place the top onto your shaker Or if you're doing it with a pint glass and a tin, throw that on top, shake it vigorously, again until frost forms in the shaker. That's when you know it's done. Empty the ice from the cocktail glass, strain it into your cocktail glass, garnish with a lemon peel, serve and enjoy. That is the Vodka Martini. Oh, and by the way, somebody asked, what if your date says I'd like it dirty?
That would be you.
Yeah.
Anybody know what a dirty martini is?
Olive juice.
Olive juice.
Olive juice.
Yes. You'll garnish that with an olive, and you'll use some of the actual brine that comes in the jar. And again, if they say very dirty, use a lot of juice. Little dirty is less juice. So that is a dirty martini. Okay, which takes us to part 2. I usually ask people a little trivia question. What is the first film that Bond actually orders a martini? It is in Goldfinger, of course, when he says, I'll have a martini shaken, not stirred. Now, Goldfinger is actually very interesting to me because it starts to you start to really see things in this film that will define James Bond going forward. And what I find personally fascinating is that in most cases, in most of the examples, usually it has to do with alcohol. There are 2 traits that you'll see start to emerge, and again, they just tend to be alcohol related. Take this scene where we will hear Bond talk about brandy.
Have a little more of this rather disappointing brandy.
Well, what's the matter with it?
I'd say it was a 30-year-old fiend indifferently blended, sir. With an overdose of Bon Bois.
Colonel Smithers is giving the lecture, 007.
That is some palate, right? So the first trait we see start to emerge is that Bond is an expert on all things. Again, like I said, that is some palate. With an overdose of Bon Bois, he says, you might think somebody spilled some French perfume into the brandy. To fully understand Bond's critique of this brandy, you have to know a couple things about what brandy is. And again, this is one of my favorite things to talk about in bartending class because it brings up the processes of fermentation and distillation, which I will explain very quickly, I promise. To make brandy, you start out with a simple grape. You crush the grape. The natural yeast will interact with the sugars in that grape, and it will ferment to create ethyl alcohol. That process, that change that happens is called fermentation. This will give you wine, of course. If you break a grape, let it ferment, it becomes wine. The next step in the brandy making process is distillation. Distillation refers to the process of separating out materials or mixtures. Meaning, you want to now separate out whatever grape juice is left in this mixture, leaving just the alcohol. When you've reached a mixture that is now 36 to 60% alcohol alone, that is now brandy. The word brandy comes from the Dutch word called brandywine, which means burnt wine, and I'm sure I pronounced that miserably. Okay, so what is Bond saying? I'd say it was a 30-year-old fiend indifferently blended with an overdose of Bon Bois. Fiend is a simple French term which means a high-quality brandy. Spelled F-I-N-E, pronounced fiend. Bon Bois. This is where it gets a little interesting to me. There are 6 specific regions within the region of Cognac in France where they make brandy. Cognac is kind of like champagne in the respect that Champagne is a sparkling white wine that comes from a specific region of France called Champagne, France. If it doesn't come from Champagne, it is not technically champagne. It could be sparkling white wine, but it's not champagne. Cognac is the same thing. If it comes from this region, that specific brandy is now cognac. The different regions which are designated by color, red meaning the most high quality region, and as you go out to the oranges and the yellows, the quality decreases. This poor little guy, second from the bottom, the light green is Bon Bois. So Bond is suggesting that this blend has too much of Bon Bois to make it a high quality brandy. Now we can get back to Oryx Stud, where Bond is offered a Mint Julep.
Now, Mr. Bond, sit down, please. Mint julep? Traditional, but satisfying. Yes, thanks. Sour mash, but not too sweet, please.
He says traditional but satisfying. It actually is very traditional in Kentucky. The mint julep was basically created around the Kentucky Derby, and this also leads to that other trait that I mentioned, where Bond will eat and drink locally. He will always take part in what the locals drink. If something is famous for that area, he wants some. When he gets off the plane, he says, I hear the bourbon and branch water is quite delightful here in Kentucky. The mint julep is an excellent choice also for whiskey enthusiasts who prefer their drinks strong but might want to sweeten it up a little bit, soften up the booze a little bit to create a more flavorful and aromatic cocktail. So when Bond graciously accepts this offer, he says that would be fine. Sour mash, not too sweet, please. The thing about sour mash, that it's important to understand that sour is not meant to imply that the flavor or taste is sour. It simply refers to a process. Sour mash is a process of making bourbon, much like the process of making sourdough bread, where you use older malt which is reused and added to the new batch. They do this as a way to maintain quality and consistency. So that is what he means by sour mash. Here's how you create a mint julep. Now, these steel cups, by the way, were sort of made famous at the Kentucky Derby. You can get these if you want, but for the most of us, we're probably going to use a Collins glass, which is the tall, skinny glass. Take a tall Collins glass, which is what they use in the film, by the way, and add a bunch of mint leaves. Also add about a half an ounce of simple syrup. Simple syrup is nothing more than sugar and water. If you boil a cup of water and you add a cup of sugar, stir it, it dissolves, that is simple syrup. They sell it in the store, don't buy it in the store. It's so easy to make, just make some for yourself. Muddle the mixture together. You will need a muddler, okay? A muddler is like a small wooden or sometimes metal. You're basically just gonna muddle these things together, okay? Common mistake bartenders make, especially with mojitos, which are now hugely popular. They'll bash and destroy these mint leaves until they're fragments of nothing. Not only do you not need to go crazy doing that, but you really don't want to. There's a bitterness that comes in the little veins and the little stems of the mint leaves, which you don't need. Once you smell mint, you're pretty much done. Fill that glass with cracked or crushed ice, then fill it with your Kentucky bourbon. Garnish it with additional mint leaves, and serve and enjoy. That is a mint julep. So with that, we'll move forward. This is part 3, and in the film Thunderball, James Bond enjoys a Collins. Specifically, he orders a rum Collins, which I will get back to in a second. But speaking of Connery, again, Connery at some point before he finishes out his term hits a level of genius that kind of just sort of leaves us all sort of a little boggled. He makes a comment on sherry, which I would like to talk about.
Well, cheers.
Cheers.
Pity about your liver, sir. It's an unusually fine Solera. 51, I believe.
There is no year for sherry, 007.
I was referring to the original vintage on which the sherry is based, sir. 1851. Unmistakable.
Precisely.
Anybody buying that? This one I find fascinating. But again, in order to understand what he is trying to express, you need to know what sherry is. Sherry is a Spanish creation. It's not French. It was created in the Cadiz region of Spain. It is made like other types of wine. Just like cognacs, it needs to come from the sherry region of Spain to be called sherry. The term sherry, comes from the Spanish word saca, which refers to the removal from the solera. Solera refers to an aging process. It's a traditional Spanish system of blending fortified wines of different ages or vintages in order to achieve a consistent quality and style. So it is a blend of different vintages, which is why I believe M says there is no year for sherry. It is also a process where the young wines are slowly introduced and blended with older wines so that the younger grape will begin to take on some characteristics of the more mature wine. Again, that is some palate that James Bond exhibits here. Again, M thinks he's finally tripped up Bond. He says there is no year for sherry. He says, I was referring to the original vintage on which the sherry is based, sir. And he concludes, 1851, unmistakable. Again, as we just discussed, the Solera is a blend of several vintages. Therefore, how can Bond cite 1 year as the vintage? Well, he does specify the original vintage. So I believe it's reasonable to assume that Bond is referring to the oldest grape of that particular grouping, dating back to 1851. Again, that is some palate. 2 questions come to my mind. First, would even the most expert wine taster be able to single out multiple vintages in a blended wine in order to identify the oldest and perhaps the most dominant year? I don't know. The other question is, how likely is it that a sherry from 1851 would still be palatable? Again, wine drinkers can tell you that wine is a living thing. It can easily go off, and if certain conditions are not met, it can spoil. Factors like light and temperature will negatively affect wine. But even if your storage is perfect, wines will have times when they peak. Like certain wines are harvested. They might peak at a certain time when that wine is just perfect for opening, and then it starts to go down. So again, 1851, I'm not sure. But who am I to disagree with James Bond? Again, vintage obviously just refers simply to the year that the grape was harvested. In this case, it would be 2004. And also there's a discussion about vintages in general. Is it as important today as it was? Bond is constantly throwing out years and vintages. Years ago, when a lot of wines, or most wines, came from places like France, where the weather conditions would sometimes change, then your vintage could be more important. You'd have good years and bad years. Today, not only because of consistency and quality in how the wine is created, places like California are incredibly consistent in their weather. So it's probably not as important as it once was. But again, sometimes certain bottles, certain vintages are spectacular. So there you go. So back to James Bond and his Collins.
Drink, sir. Rum Collins, Mr. Bond?
Yes. Just about that hour, isn't it?
For you? Of course. Vargas does not drink, does not smoke, does not make love. What do you do, Vargas? Every man has his passion. Mine is fishing. What is yours, Mr. Bond?
Well, I'm not what you'd call a passionate man.
I think it's time I went to change.
Now, aside from that being a spectacular clip, one of the things that I noticed about this, the rum Collins, first of all, most people when they hear Collins, they think of the Tom Collins. I'm sure most people have heard of a Tom Collins. Tom Collins are really, I'll just say, they're really good because the herbal qualities of gin just tend to go perfectly well with the citrus quality of a Collins. A Collins is any drink that is made with lemon juice or lime juice, sugar or simple syrup, topped with club soda. And again, I just find that the Tom Collins is spectacular for that. And if I was actually preparing, I would actually literally make a Tom Collins because I find that there's a better use for rum coming up soon. But again, it's just kind of interesting to notice that Fleming and the filmmakers decided to go with a rum Collins, I guess partially because rum is more of a local, when you're in the islands you think rum. And again, this goes back to the time when, again, gin was the norm in London back in the 60s. That's why that's why Bond's fascination with vodka is such a big deal, because again, it's like he's creating something new. Now it's just common. Like vodka is incredibly common, but back then it was gin. So let's put together a Collins glass, which is actually why they call it a Collins glass, by the way. Fill it with ice. Add 1.5 ounces, roughly, depending on the size of your glass, of rum for a rum Collins or gin for a Tom Collins. Into the glass, squeeze the juice. I like to use lemon and lime if I'm making a Collins, just to kind of keep it, change it up a little bit. And again, depending on the size of your glass, so squeeze lemon juice and lime juice. Add your simple syrup, about a half an ounce will probably do you good. Top that with club soda or seltzer. Garnish with your lemon. Serve and enjoy. I also want to just mention real fast, I know they make Collins mix or sour mix. Personally, use fresh ingredients. Use the ingredients, do it yourself. Not only is the quality better, but you can also then add or subtract depending on your personal taste. If you want it a little more sour, a good cocktail has balance. You should be able to taste the alcohol, you should be able to taste lemon, you should be able to taste sweetness. It should hit different parts of your tongue, your sour, your sweet, etc. So again, based on your personal preference, you might like it a little sweeter, a little more sour. Maybe you'll just throw a little more booze on top, etc. So again, I'm just kind of throwing it out there. Use natural ingredients. So let's move on to part 4. The Sazerac. This is the Roger Moore years. Again, things start to slack off here. You don't see many signature cocktails in the Bond films anymore. Now we're starting to drink just the vodka martinis, and of course champagne is huge at this time. Bollinger is now a sponsor. So between the vodka martinis and the champagne, we don't get a lot of signature cocktails anymore. For Your Eyes Only is a nice exception. Bond drinks Glühwein while he is in Italy. It is a mulled spice wine, very appropriate for where he is. He also goes to Greece, and before his meal, he orders an ouzo, which again is a aperitif that is created in Greece. Also, I would like to throw one little detail out. One more thing that Bond sort of throws out there that people might not know what this is.
Must use lots of lemons.
Sir Hilary, please come to meet our patients. Ladies, this is Sir Hilary Bray, Baronet.
How do you do?
He's a famous genealogist.
You will have a drink, yes?
Please,
Thank
come
you.
and sit down.
How do you do?
Hello.
Thank you.
What is a baronet?
It's a kind of inferior sort of baron.
Oh, how disappointing.
Well,
Oh, I don't mean you're inferior. I mean the title is.
Yes, but what's a genealogist? What is that?
Pommy word for an old people's doctor.
Ah, so he's here to cure Fräulein Bund. Watch yourself, she's got ears like an elephant.
What will you drink, sir?
malt whiskey and branch water, please.
Now, of all the wonderful, beautiful things to see in that scene, I wanted you to notice his drink order. Malt whiskey and branch water. Malt whiskey is a whiskey that is made from malted barley and not blended with grain whiskey. Think single malt scotch. Bond is really ordering scotch here, and he's really specifying a single malt scotch. Branch water. Originally referring to the water directly from the stream that the distillery was built on, now refers to any creek, brook, or stream of drinkable water. Again, this was something in the old days, if a distillery was built, it was always built on some sort of running water because they needed the water to create alcohol. They would refer to the branch of that same water. But now, again, if they say bourbon and branch water, you're strictly talking about just water. It's basically what Bond is ordering here is a single malt scotch with water. So, which brings us back to our other cocktail that James Bond orders.
Bourbon, no ice, please.
2 Sazeracs. Where's your sense of adventure, James? This is New Orleans. Relax.
And frankly, I couldn't agree with Felix more. You're in New Orleans, have a local cocktail, the Sazerac. And the Sazerac is incredibly local to New Orleans. I highly recommend trying this if you get to New Orleans. By the way, Matt is setting up a trip. A lot of you guys know this already, to New Orleans. this May, we will be having Sazerac, probably in the Sazerac bar in the Roosevelt Hotel, which I am very much looking forward to. What is a Sazerac? Sazerac to me tastes, if you've never had it before, it tastes like gold, green, and purple. Don't ask me what that means, but I swear when you have one, you'll know what I'm talking about. The gold from the rye, the green from the Herbsaint, the purple from the... It tastes like New Orleans, I swear to you. So what is a Sazerac? Take a stout rocks glass, fill it with ice, set it aside to let the glass chill. Take your cocktail shaker or pint glass, fill it with ice. Add about 3 ounces of rye whiskey. They specifically say rye whiskey because a lot of whiskeys, like bourbon, are corn-based and tend to be sweeter. You're already going to sweeten this one, so start off with a not-so-sweet whiskey. Rye works for this. Add half an ounce of simple syrup. Add 3 or 4 dashes of what is called Peychaud's bitters. Again, it is very difficult to try to explain what it tastes like, but it has a licorice flavor, and again, I swear to you, it just tastes like purple. Empty the ice from your rocks glass, throw in a splash of Pernod or Herbsaint. This is what's called Herbsaint, which is essentially a substitute for what was absinthe. Pernod was typically known as an absinthe substitute because absinthe was legal. It would make you see pink elephants. But absinthe today is actually legal again. So you could get the real thing. But you're only going to use enough to swish around the glass to coat the inside and then throw out what's in there. At that point, you will strain your cocktail into your rocks glass and then you'll serve and enjoy. Some will put a lemon peel in this drink. Others will peel the lemon peel, twist it over the drink, and discard the lemon peel. Purists will say do not throw the lemon in there, but again, I've seen it both ways. Whichever you prefer is fine. Which will now take us to the Pierce Brosnan era. Poor Timothy Dalton, that poor guy did not get himself a signature cocktail. If I can imagine any Bond who I thought belonged with a stiff whiskey in his hand sitting in Harry's bar, it's Timothy Dalton. Again, we stuck with the occasional martini and champagne. Enter Pierce Brosnan, where for a lot of his tenure, a lot of the women were out drinking him. M drinks bourbon. She's actually technically not drinking bourbon, by the way, because she takes out a bottle of Jack Daniels, which is a Tennessee whiskey, which is technically not bourbon. But anyway, here's where Bond finally gets himself what I call a signature cocktail.
Magnificent view.
It is, isn't it? Too bad it's lost on everybody else.
Mojito? You should try it.
Jacinta Johnson. Our friends call me Jinx.
My friends call me James Bond. Jinx, you say?
Born on Friday the 13th.
You believe in bad luck?
Let's just say my relationships don't seem to last.
I know the feeling.
That scene continues on, but I can only cringe so much. Finally, James Bond is back to drinking locally. He is in Cuba and he drinks a mojito, which is basically the signature cocktail of Cuba. Cuba, the sugar cane is huge. It's a crop from Cuba. So the idea that they would use a sugar-based liquor like rum. So here's how you make a mojito. Again, take your tall Collins glass, throw in a handful of mint leaves, and a few chunks of lime. Take your lime and mint leaves, drop them in the bottom of your glass with about a half an ounce of simple syrup, and muddle this. Again, you don't need to kill the mint leaves. Just do it until when you smell the aromatics of the mint leaves, you are good to go. Fill your glass then with ice. Add about an ounce and a half of rum, again depending on the size of your glass, and fill that with club soda. You will garnish that with additional lime and additional mint leaves, however you want to do it. Serve and enjoy. And again, using your natural ingredients, you can add more sugar, more booze, more soda, whatever you like. Which sort of brings us full circle when we discuss the Vesper. Again, Casino Royale, one of my personal favorites. One of the oddities about Casino Royale to me is that it has one of the most spectacular signature Ian Fleming James Bond cocktails, and also one of the most boring cocktails, which frankly I couldn't really believe that James Bond would actually order.
You've had a good night, Dr. Future.
Sir, I'll check the bed, please.
I checked.
Can I assist you, sir? Good evening. Roger Mount came with soda, please.
Good job, big boy.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Guten Abend.
So it took me a couple tries to even be sure what he was ordering, because I was convinced that James Bond had just ordered a rum and coke, which to me has got to be one of the most boring cocktails you could ever have. What he's actually ordering there, and again, I had to look at this many times before I realized this, and I had to watch it with the subtitles. He actually orders a large Mount Gay with soda. So he's not actually ordering a rum and coke. He's actually ordering a Mount Gay, which is a darker rum with club soda, which almost will give you that sort of rum and coke color, which you can't really see here too well. But again, you can tell it's not actually rum and coke. He's actually drinking a Mount Gay with soda. But back to our wonderful Vesper.
Send the barman over, please. Dry Martini.
Oui, monsieur.
Wait. 3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka, half a measure of quina lily. Shake it over ice, and then add a thin slice of lemon peel.
Yes, sir.
You know, I'll have one of those.
So will I. It's not that late.
My friend, bring me one as well. Keep the fruit.
That's it? Hmm? Anyone want to play poker now?
Someone's in a hurry.
Now, if you're like me and you've read this book a million times, when you saw the movie and you actually ordered this cocktail, I mean, you kind of went a little crazy. I know I did. What's interesting about this cocktail, before I go into the actual recipe, is that a lot of these liquors have sort of changed over time. The quina lily that Bond actually specifies doesn't exist. I'm going to let my friend Alan jump in here and talk about how you can make a Vesper today.
Okay, the problem with a lot of this stuff is back in Fleming's day, that this stuff was all higher proof, all right? So your vodkas were generally 100 proof, they're generally 80 proof now. Gordon's gin was 94 proof. It's been reformulated a number of times. I think the last time back in the 90s, it's now about 80 proof. So if you want to make these, what you need is to use something and this is that Bond actually drank beefeaters back then, and this is still a higher proof. And to get yourself a 100 proof vodka like Stoli 100, this stuff is getting harder to find. Yeah, I went to, what Total Wine the other day, they didn't have this, they had some 100 proof vodkas, and then Stoli's kind of a staple. Now, the quina lily becomes a problem. There's a way to doctor up Lillet Blanc, which is what you can get today, but I don't know why I add ingredients to it. You can get this Coqui Americano, so this is found relatively easily. It's not the same formulation, but it has the same similar taste with the bitterness, which is what the quina had in it, which was actually quinine. There's another one I haven't been able to find that's supposedly really, really interesting. This quina, it's quina L'Aéro d'Or, which is basically the golden airplane. This stuff actually has some quinine in it. It should actually be very close, but it's very hard to find. I haven't found any yet. But if you're actually going to make this the way, and you want the taste of the cocktail that he made taste, you need to kind of modify what you're doing because the ingredients that he specifies are no longer exactly the same. And the first time I made this with Lillet Blanc, it's not that great of a cocktail. But when I use the Coqui Americano, it becomes very good. Okay?
Beautiful. Thank you, my friend. Okay, and we're kind of full circle again, coming back to the actual creation of the Vesper. How do you actually make a Vesper? And incidentally, too, this is one of those times where I wish I was doing this in front of you. When I described making a martini in the beginning, I said fill your glass with ice, pour your vodka over that. Here, you can do it differently, and a lot of bars are doing this now. Well, they'll, especially because this cocktail the recipe is done in parts. So it says 3 measures of Gordon's, 1 of vodka. Well, a measure can be whatever you want. A measure can be a shot. A measure can be an ounce. It can be a pint. I mean, you can make a pitcher based on the measurements he's giving you, as long as the parts, as long as the the ratios are correct. So take your cocktail glass, fill it with ice to chill, and put that aside. Take your shaker and add 3 measures of Gordon's gin. Again, probably 3 ounces. 1 measure of vodka, so 1 ounce of vodka, and half a measure of quinoa lillet, so half an ounce of quinoa lillet. Fill your shaker with ice. Place your top on your shaker. Shake vigorously again till it's ice cold. He specifies ice cold. When frost actually starts to form and you can feel it, you know you're done. Dump the ice out of your cocktail glass. Strain your cocktail into your cocktail glass, and of course, garnish it with a thin slice of lemon peel. You can actually use a full-blown like potato peeler and peel off a whole chunk. You can get what is called a channel knife, which is almost like what they would use for baking, where you can just slice off thin slices, just like you see here. Or you can actually carve up a lemon and cut out little slices like that. That is the Cocktails of James Bond. Thank you very much for watching. Again, the soup to nuts on bartending I have in this book. I'll be hawking them next door if you're interested. So thanks very much. Hope you liked it. Thank you. All right, my website is Being James Bond. Go there.